What if I told you some of your favorite motorcycle brands might not survive 2025? Sounds crazy, right? These aren't just random no-name companies. We're talking about big names like Indian, KTM, Triumph, and even Suzuki. Brands that once ruled the road, now quietly slipping into financial quicksand, dealer shutdowns, vanishing models, and corporate chaos. Heck, the last brand on this list isn't just struggling, it already feels over for them. So what is going on behind the scenes? Why are these legendary names suddenly looking shaky? Stick around because we're about to dive deep into the motorcycle brands that are dangerously close to collapsing. Number 6. Indian. We all know the entire motorcycle industry is going through a rough patch at the moment, but one of the brands worst hit by this dip is Indian. This brand has been around since the early 1900s, and it's survived wars, bankruptcies, and more resurrections than Loki. But here in 2025, the Thunderbird logo is facing more than just tough competition. It's staring down the barrel of an industry shift it might not be ready for. The core of Indian's problems comes down to something surprisingly simple. The world is changing, and Indian hasn't kept up. The company is still producing big, heavy, gas-powered cruisers and baggers like its 03, and everyone's idea of rebellion is a leather jacket and a Willie Nelson playlist. And hey, nothing's wrong with that vibe. There's a romantic, almost poetic appeal to ripping down Route 66 on a Thunderstroke V-twin. But when you're relying almost entirely on nostalgia in an age obsessed with innovation, you're skating on thin ice. And in Indian's case, that ice is starting to crack. For starters, Indian's electric game is, well, non-existent. While Harley-Davidson, its closest and most obvious rival, at least made a splash with the Livewire, even if it flopped totally, Indian hasn't put out a single electric model under its own name. Sure, parent company Polaris tried its hand with the electric zero-based e-bikes, but that's like showing up to a UFC fight with a Nerf gun. The result? Indian is completely absent from the fastest growing segment of the motorcycle industry. And that brings us to the next point. Indian is trapped in a shrinking market. The brand caters mostly to older riders, the boomer cruiser crowd, if you will. These are folks who grew up idolizing chopper culture, who want a bike that looks and feels like the real deal, loud, heavy, draped in chrome, and with an engine big enough to tow a fishing boat. But here's the problem. That demographic is aging out of the sport. Younger riders are looking for lighter, more affordable tech-savvy machines, something Indian hasn't quite figured out how to offer without diluting its identity. Meanwhile, their core competitor, Harley-Davidson, has been playing a much smarter long game. Harley's been investing in electric tech, branching into lightweight models like the X350 and X500 in Asian markets, and appealing to urban commuters who want style without the size. Indian, on the other hand, keeps swinging for the heavyweight cruiser fences with price tags that make Gen Z riders clutch their avocado toast in horror. A new Indian Challenger will set you back close to 25 grand. That's not just expensive, that's second mortgage territory for a lot of riders. Another factor dragging Indian down is its lack of international clout. Unlike KTM, Honda, or even Royal Enfield, Indian has never really managed to become a major player outside of North America. And with sales in the US softening due to inflation, rising interest rates, and an overall decline in big bike registrations, that's a huge problem. Relying almost entirely on one region is like investing all your savings in one stock. If that stock dips, you're toast. And let's not forget Indian's dealer network, which isn't exactly vast. Walk into any small or mid-sized American town, and you're far more likely to see a Harley dealership than an Indian one. That limits exposure, limits test rides, and makes parts and servicing a hassle. In a world where convenience often trumps loyalty, that's a dangerous game to play. Now, credit where credit's due. Indian has made some valiant attempts to shake things up. The FTR 1200 was a cool, flat-track-inspired naked bike that got people talking, but it never turned into a breakout hit, partly because of its high price and slightly confused identity. And then there's the Scout, a middleweight cruiser that's arguably their most accessible bike. But even that's now facing stiff competition from newer, cheaper models from Yamaha, Honda, and Royal Enfield. And guess what? Those other brands are killing it in global markets, while Indian is still struggling to break out of the American diner and dragpipe scene. On the corporate side, things aren't peachy either. Polaris, Indian's parent company, seems increasingly disinterested in pouring more money into motorcycles when their power sports divisions, ATVs, snowmobiles, and side-by-sides, is way more profitable. If Indian's not hitting big numbers, it wouldn't be shocking if Polaris quietly began shifting resources elsewhere. It wouldn't be the first time an iconic motorcycle brand got pushed aside in favor of something with a higher return on investment. Business is business after all. Put it all together and you get a perfect storm. A shrinking audience, no serious electric offering, pricing that alienates young riders, weak international sales, limited dealer presence, and a parent company that may have bigger fish to fry. Indian isn't doomed yet, but if it doesn't pivot fast, we could be looking at another collapse. And unlike the last few times, there might not be another resurrection waiting in the wings. Because at the end of the day, even the most legendary names can run out of road if they ignore the signs. And right now, Indian motorcycle is headed toward a crossroads. Number 5. KTM. The big orange machine from Austria might look like it's riding high, but under that aggressive styling and motocross swagger is a company that's starting to look a little overwhelmed. Because when you grow this fast, this recklessly, and try to be everything to everyone, something's bound to crack. Let's start with the basics. KTM isn't struggling with brand recognition or lack of product demand. In fact, quite the opposite. They've exploded over the past decade, gobbling up market share in everything from dirt bikes to sport bikes, adventure bikes to entry-level commuters. They've been on a buying spree too, scooping up Husqvarna, relaunching Gas, and expanding aggressively into new global markets. On paper, that kind of growth sounds like a dream, but in reality, it's more like a caffeine-fueled sprint toward burnout. See, KTM's entire operation is stretched thin. The production lines are running hot, R&D is under pressure to keep innovating, and with all the new models hitting the pipeline, quality control is starting to take some major hits. Riders are beginning to notice, and not in a good way. You can find forums and reviews filled with complaints about electrical gremlins, sensor issues, weird fueling glitches, and parts that seem to fail just a little too often for comfort. KTM's always had a bit of a quirky European vibe, but lately that's starting to sound more like an excuse than a personality trait. What's even more worrying is that the problems aren't just isolated to one or two models. They're popping up across the board, from the 390 Duke to the 1290 Super Adventure. And the 790, 890 platform? That one's gotten a reputation as brilliant when it works, but expensive and frustrating when it doesn't. It's like buying a high-maintenance dog that wins trophies one day and chews through your wiring the next. Then there's the dealer network, which varies widely in quality depending on where you are. Some KTM dealers are fantastic, knowledgeable, passionate, stocked with parts. Others, not so much. If your local dealer is one of the latter, good luck getting a warranty claim processed without a headache the size of a Dakar Rally stage. The support side hasn't grown as fast or carefully as the product line, and it's leaving a lot of KTM owners feeling like they've been left in the dust. And let's not forget the whole Pierre Mobility situation. That's the parent company overseeing KTM, Husqvarna, and Gas, and it's been doubling down on expanding the empire, even taking a big stake in MV Agusta recently. But behind the scenes, Pierre's financials have been getting a little murky. There have been layoffs, production cuts, and even rumors that they're quietly slowing down output to avoid flooding the market. When a company starts pulling back like that, especially after such aggressive expansion, it's usually not just to optimize efficiency. It smells a lot like damage control. Oh, and here's another twist. The entire motorcycle industry is watching KTM's India partnership with Bajaj very carefully. This relationship helped launch their small displacement bikes worldwide, and it's been crucial for their global expansion. But Bajaj is a massive company with its own ambitions, and cracks have started to show in their collaboration. There's tension over which markets get which models, who controls what part of development, and how pricing is handled globally. If that relationship were to fracture, KTM would be in a very uncomfortable position trying to keep up global production at the same pace. Even on the racing side, once KTM's golden goose, the pressure is mounting. Their Moto GP program has had moments of brilliance, sure, but consistent results are elusive. And success on the track hasn't translated into the kind of dominance they were likely banking on in the showroom. In fact, some fans are starting to wonder if KTM's obsession with racing glory is pulling focus and funds away from improving their street bikes. All of this adds up to a brand that's starting to wobble under its own weight. KTM's trying to be the lightweight enduro king, the street bike disruptor, the premium European alternative, and the budget beginner bike maker all at once. That's a lot of hats to wear, and sooner or later, you stretch yourself so thin that none of them fit right anymore. The bottom line? KTM isn't doomed. Yet. But unless they slow down, clean up the quality issues, streamline their operations, and stop chasing every shiny object in the industry, they could end up being the perfect example of how rapid growth without discipline can turn into a spectacular wipeout. And in the motorcycle world, no matter how many races you've won, it's the long ride that counts. Right now, KTM's engine is redlining, and if they don't back off the throttle soon, there might not be enough road left to save it. Number 4. Triumph. Unlike the other brands we've talked about, Triumph Motorcycles is in a whole different kind of trouble. One that's slower, quieter, but possibly even more dangerous. Because Triumph isn't going down in a blaze of headline-grabbing chaos. No, Triumph is bleeding out the old-fashioned way, through 1,000 small cuts, a few missteps, and a creeping identity crisis that's threatening to unravel one of the most iconic names in motorcycling. At first glance, Triumph looks solid. They've got a lineup that checks all the right boxes, retro moderns like the Bonneville, aggressive nakeds like the Street Triple, even off-road ambitions with the Tiger series. They've recently dipped their toe into motocross, formed a factory MXGP team, and even developed an entry-level 400cc platform in partnership with Bajaj to chase the Asian market. So on paper, things seem active. But the cracks are showing. Let's start with the Bajaj partnership, because while it looks like a smart move to reach budget-conscious riders, the timing is questionable. Right now, the small displacement market is already oversaturated. KTM's been in that game for years. Honda and Yamaha own the commuter world. Royal Enfield is dominating the affordable retro scene. So when Triumph launched the Speed 400 and Scrambler 400X, they were late to a party where half the food was already gone and the DJ had packed up. Worse, Triumph's move into this segment risks damaging the brand's long-cultivated premium image. For decades, Triumph stood as a classy, refined alternative to the flashy Italians and brutish Americans. Now they're suddenly making $5,000 bikes in India and trying to convince traditional Bonneville buyers that it's all part of the same heritage. That disconnect isn't easy to bridge, and if these budget bikes flood the streets, there's a real risk that Triumph starts to feel less like a boutique British brand and more like another badge-engineered face in the crowd. Then there's the issue of identity. Triumph built its modern resurgence on the backs of bikes that felt timeless. The Bonneville, the Thruxton, the Scrambler. These weren't just machines, they were rolling tributes to the golden age of motorcycling, infused with modern engineering. But now the lineup feels muddled. They've been chasing trends, updating retro bikes with TFT screens, dropping displacement numbers, shifting names around, and slowly watering down the classic appeal that brought people in to begin with. The adventure segment, for example, has ballooned into a confusing mess. Triumph's Tiger range now includes the 660, 850, 900, and 1200, each with multiple trims, different wheel sizes, and price tags that stretch from modest to near luxury. It's got to the point where even the die-hard Triumph fans aren't sure which Tiger is right for them. That's not product diversity, that's decision fatigue, and when customers are confused, they just don't buy. Even the Street Triple, once the crown jewel of midweight nakeds, is feeling the squeeze. It's still a riot to ride, no doubt, but competition has caught up. Yamaha's MT-09 is lighter, cheaper, and backed by a bigger service network. KTM's 890 Duke R hits harder and feels more aggressive, and Triumph's latest update, while good, feels more like a facelift than a revolution. The spark that once made the Street Triple a category killer has dulled, and Triumph doesn't seem to have a plan to reignite it. Behind the scenes, there are growing concerns about financial stability and ownership structure. Triumph is still privately owned by John Bloor and his family, and while that's kept them independent and resistant to corporate meddling, it's also limited their ability to scale up or modernize at the pace of their competitors. There's no injection of fresh vision, no new leadership pushing bold ideas. The brand seems caught in a loop. Retool, rebrand, refresh, without ever reinventing anything. Even worse, the UK's economic climate hasn't been kind to homegrown manufacturers. Rising costs, inflation, Brexit fallout, and a tightening motorcycle market in Europe have all taken their toll. Triumph's factories in Hinckley have had to slow production, and whispers of layoffs have started surfacing in industry circles. While not yet public, the mood among insiders is more cautious than confident. Here's where it all starts to really unravel. Electrification. Triumph has been talking about electric bikes for years now. They unveiled a sleek electric prototype, Project TE1, that looked promising, but that was a prototype and there's still no actual electric Triumph in showrooms. Meanwhile, BMW and even startups like Zero and Energica are already carving out space in the electric scene. Triumph's inaction is starting to look less like cautious planning and more like paralyzing indecision. Why is that a big deal? Because while the current market still loves gas-powered bikes, the shift is coming. Governments are tightening emissions rules, urban riding zones are going electric, and younger riders, if they ride at all, are far more tech-savvy and sustainability conscious. Triumph's brand was always built on nostalgia, but nostalgia alone won't power your future, especially if your competitors are already plugging into theirs. And if we're being brutally honest, Triumph is playing defense. They're reacting to trends, not setting them. They're trying to hold their ground in a rapidly shifting landscape without showing much willingness to evolve. The new models feel safe, the marketing feels tired, and the soul of the brand, the thing that once made Triumph feel so effortlessly cool, is starting to fade into the background. So no, Triumph isn't dead. They're not even dying, but they're coasting, and in today's motorcycle industry, that might be the most dangerous thing you can do. Because brands that coast don't just get passed, they get forgotten. Triumph needs to decide whether it wants to be a heritage name resting on its laurels, or a brand that reinvents itself before it's too late. Right now, it's stuck somewhere in between, and as history has shown us more than once, that middle lane, it's where a lot of once great names go to disappear. Number 3. Suzuki. Things might be very obvious for brands like Triumph. But including Suzuki in this list might raise a few eyebrows because things look perfect for them. That's well, until you look close enough and that brand is Suzuki. On the surface, it looks like Suzuki is cruising along just fine. In fact, they pulled off their best global motorcycle sales in over 15 years in 2024, shipping out a solid 2.1 million units worldwide. That's not just a good year, that's a victory lap. And in India, which is one of the world's biggest two-wheeler markets, Suzuki absolutely crushed it, selling over 1.25 million bikes. That's an 11% jump from the previous year. So with numbers like that, you might be thinking, what's Suzuki doing among brands on the brink of collapse? Well, let's just say the numbers don't tell the whole story, because while things might look good from one angle, there are cracks forming beneath the surface, and if Suzuki doesn't move fast, they could be heading straight into a ditch. First, let's talk about the home turf problem. Japan's motorcycle market is shrinking fast, and it's not some short-term dip, it's a full-on downward spiral. In 2024, the market took a 9.5% hit. For Suzuki, the drop was 8.6%. That might sound like a small blip, but in an industry where margins are thin and competition is fierce, that's a gut punch. And it's not just about numbers, it's about relevance. Japan's population is aging rapidly. Young people are opting for public transportation or compact cars, and motorcycles just aren't the cultural staple they used to be. If your backyard stops caring about your product, you've got a problem. And then there's the Vanishing Act in the UK. Suzuki has started pulling out of key dealership locations, closing 30 showrooms and slashing their total UK presence down to 100 stores. That's not just trimming the fat, that's a strategic retreat. And when a company pulls out of a mature market like the UK, it's rarely because they're doing too well. It's more like they're cutting off limbs to save the body. Now let's swing over to China, which should be a goldmine for any motorcycle brand. But instead of cashing in, Suzuki's been taking hits. Sales dropped a staggering 25.4%. You heard that right, they're on a free fall. And in a country that's rapidly transitioning to electric scooters and small EVs, Suzuki's reluctance to jump into that space early is coming back to bite them hard. Speaking of electric, that brings us to one of Suzuki's most glaring issues. They're stuck in the past. While nearly every major brand is knee-deep in EV development, some even launching entire sub-brands around electric mobility, Suzuki is just now getting around to launching their first proper electric scooter, the E-Access. Meanwhile, lesser-known Chinese startups are already miles ahead, refining battery tech, building charging infrastructure, and cementing brand loyalty among the next generation of riders. Suzuki? They're still trying to get to the starting line. And even when they do launch something new, like the GSX-8R, it feels like they've been throwing darts in the dark. There's no clear direction. Are they performance-driven? Are they practical commuters? Are they luxury cruisers? Suzuki's brand identity is all over the place. Once known for bulletproof bikes like the SV650 or the old-school GSX-Rs, their current lineup feels like a hodgepodge of ideas rather than a well-executed strategy. It's like they're trying to please everyone, and in the process, they're not really exciting anyone. All in all, Suzuki is in a weird place. They're selling well for now, especially in countries like India, but the foundation is wobbling. They're losing ground in key markets, dragging their feet on electrification, and struggling to articulate who they are in a rapidly evolving motorcycle world. If they don't find their footing soon, especially in high-margin forward-thinking segments, they could go from being one of the most underrated names in the game to another cautionary tale of a legacy brand that didn't move fast enough when the industry changed gears. Number 2. Moto Guzzi. Moto Guzzi is like the romantic, eccentric Italian uncle of the motorcycle world, a brand so steeped in history it practically leaks espresso and nostalgia. Founded in 1921, Moto Guzzi has built its legacy on character, charm, and those unmistakable transverse V-twin engines that stick out like wings. For a certain kind of rider, Guzzi was never just a bike, it was a lifestyle. But in 2025, that lifestyle is starting to look like it's running on fumes, and not the good kind. Let's get this out of the way first. Moto Guzzi isn't going away tomorrow. It's backed by the Piaggio Group, which also owns Vespa, Aprilia, and a few other European brands, so there's a financial safety net. But that net isn't made of steel, it's more like a hammock, and Guzzi's been swinging lazily on it for a bit too long. In a world of rapid innovation and fast-paced evolution, Moto Guzzi still moves like it's stuck in a cafe in 1975, sipping wine and telling stories about the good old days. The first major issue is stagnation. For years, the brand leaned heavily on the same core identity, simple bikes, low-end torque, and that signature sideways V-twin layout. And while there's absolutely a place for tradition, Guzzi has been flogging the same horse for decades. Bikes like the V7 and V9 are charming, sure, but underpowered and underfeatured compared to everything else on the market. The Triumph Bonneville will outrun it, a Royal Enfield will undercut it, and a Yamaha XSR 700 will do both. So where does that leave Moto Guzzi? smack in the middle of nowhere. Now, they did release the V100 Mandello, a bold step forward with liquid cooling, modern electronics, and even adaptive aerodynamics. On paper, it looked like Moto Guzzi had finally woken up, but the execution has been a mixed bag. The launch was delayed, availability is spotty, dealers don't know when they'll get inventory, and even when the bike does show up, the buzz fades quickly. Guzzi fans are intrigued, but the rest of the market has already moved on. One new model isn't enough to rewrite decades of irrelevance, and it certainly won't save a brand that still feels like it's operating out of a time capsule. Let's talk dealer support, or rather, the lack of it. In the US, one of Moto Guzzi's most important potential markets, you're lucky if you can find a dealership within 100 miles. And even if you do, parts availability is inconsistent, service knowledge is questionable, and you'll probably wait months for something simple like a throttle cable. For a modern rider who's used to same-day Amazon shipping and fully stocked service departments, that kind of customer experience just doesn't fly. Then there's marketing, or as Guzzi calls it, vaguely showing up once a year at EICMA and hoping someone notices. The brand barely advertises, doesn't engage with younger riders, and still leans on grainy black and white footage of vintage racers to stir the soul. It's all well and good for the diehard enthusiasts, but for everyone else, Moto Guzzi might as well be a cryptid. Most new riders don't even know it exists, and that's a serious problem. Meanwhile, the motorcycle industry is changing fast, and Moto Guzzi is still crawling while the rest are sprinting. Adventure bikes are getting smarter, naked bikes are getting sharper, electric bikes are charging into the mainstream, and what's Moto Guzzi doing? Releasing yet another special edition V7 with a new paint job. There's a fine line between staying true to your roots and just refusing to evolve, and Guzzi is towing that line hard. What's worse is the internal pressure from Piaggio itself. Moto Guzzi is the oldest brand in the group, but it's far from the most profitable. Aprilia has the sport market covered, Vespa prints money with scooters, and Moto Guzzi? It's the oddball that keeps asking for more R&D funding without showing much return. If Piaggio ever decides it needs to streamline operations, guess which brand is first on the chopping block? And don't forget, the motorcycle market in general is shrinking in Europe. Younger generations aren't buying bikes like they used to. Cities are cracking down on noise and emissions. Insurance costs are going up, and unless a bike offers something truly exciting or truly practical, it's getting left behind. Unfortunately, Moto Guzzi doesn't quite tick either box. It's too quirky to be mainstream and too underpowered to be thrilling, and in today's market, that's a dangerous place to be. Even longtime fans are starting to feel it. Forums that used to buzz with passion now sound more like group therapy. Owners swap tips on how to fix nagging issues with their V85 TTs, complain about the lack of aftermarket support, or wonder if their next bike should be something less stressful. When your most loyal riders are starting to consider jumping ship, it's a red flag, and Guzzi's flying it high. The thing is, Moto Guzzi doesn't need to be huge. It's never going to outsell Honda or flood the streets like Yamaha, but it does need to matter. It needs to give riders a reason to choose something different, something soulful. That means stepping up their game, modernizing production, fixing the dealer network, investing in actual marketing, and releasing more bikes like the V100 Mandello without taking 5 years to do it. Because as it stands, Moto Guzzi is in a dangerous spot. Not quite alive, not quite dead, just kind of coasting. And while coasting may sound relaxing, in the motorcycle world, it usually ends with a tow truck and a for sale sign. If Guzzi wants to keep that iconic eagle flying, it's going to need more than heritage. It's going to need horsepower, hustle, and one hell of a second wind. Number 1. Norton. Of all the brands we've talked about so far, Norton has been hit the worst. The brand is just trying to stay alive. At this point, Norton isn't so much a motorcycle company as it is a case study in how many times a brand can go bankrupt and still come back for another round. The drama surrounding Norton has been nothing short of cinematic. Corruption, financial scandal, broken promises, angry customers, even a government investigation. Seriously, if you made a movie about Norton's last 10 years, people would call it unrealistic. Back in 2020, things hit rock bottom when former CEO Stuart Garner was exposed for misusing millions from investors' pension funds to prop up the company. We're talking about actual retirement savings being used to keep Norton's Smoke and Mirrors Act going. The backlash was swift, and so was the collapse. But in a surprising twist, India's TVS Motor Company stepped in and bought the rights to Norton in a move that seemed like it might actually work. TVS is a serious player, and there was a genuine hope that they'd inject the structure, discipline, and funding that Norton so badly needed. For a moment, it looked like the Phoenix was finally ready to rise from the ashes without immediately crashing into another financial fireball. Unfortunately, the problems run deeper than just bad leadership. TVS inherited a mess. The brand's reputation had been torched, not just with investors, but with riders. There were stories of people waiting years for bikes they had paid deposits on. Bikes that did get delivered often had glaring mechanical flaws, rushed finishes, or weren't roadworthy. Fixing that kind of damage isn't as easy as slapping a fresh coat of paint on the tank. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, especially in a niche like high-end motorcycles where the buyers are picky, passionate, and usually well-informed. To its credit, TVS has been trying. They moved Norton into a new state-of-the-art facility in Solihull and promised better quality control, transparent operations, and a more serious approach to engineering. They even relaunched the Commando and V4SV models with updated specs and a clear emphasis on craftsmanship. But here's the kicker. Even with all the upgrades, Norton's bikes are still ridiculously expensive. We're talking over 40 grand for a V4SV superbike, and that's before dealer markups or customizations. That's a tough sell in a post-pandemic economy where luxury purchases are drying up and most riders are looking for value and reliability. Norton's pricing puts them in the same conversation as Ducati, BMW, and even boutique builders like Bimota, brands that, unlike Norton, haven't spent the last few years unraveling in public. And Norton still doesn't have the dealer support or service infrastructure to back up its premium status. In simpler terms, you can't charge Ferrari prices if your customer service still feels like a garage fire. Add to that the fact Norton still only makes a tiny number of bikes per year. We're not talking tens of thousands of units, we're talking hundreds. That makes them feel more like a passion project for TVS than a serious contender in the market. And when a brand is that small, every delay, every bad review, every missed production goal hurts a lot more. You don't get the luxury of shrugging off a bad year when you're only shipping a few hundred units globally. At the end of the day, Norton is a brand that people want to root for. The name carries serious weight in the history books, with a racing legacy that once stood toe-to-toe with the best in the world, but nostalgia can only take you so far. Without consistent production, solid financial management, and a plan for the future, including electrification, Norton is in serious danger of becoming a museum piece rather than a motorcycle brand. TVS might have the money to keep the lights on, but unless Norton can finally break free from its cycle of chaos and actually deliver modern, reliable bikes in real volume, it's hard to see a future where they're more than just a boutique curiosity. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. See you in the next video.